Today I will be speaking on the subject of the mind, the science behind detaching the mind from the world and attaching it to the Supreme Personality. So first, let me offer my obeisances unto God and Guru. Prathamam Sadgurum Vande Shri Krishnam Tadanantaram Guru Papatmana Trata Shri Krishnas Twamalatmana Vande Navaghanashyamam Pitakauseyavasasam Sanandam Sundaram Shuddham Shri Krishnam Prakriteha Param Namah Kamalnabhaya Namah Namah Kamalpadaya Namaste Kamalekshana Yo Brahmanam Vidhati Purvam Yo Vai Vedanscha Prahinoti Tasmai Tagvam Devamatma Buddhi Prakasham Mumukshurvai Sharanamaham Prapadye. So it's a regular spiritual practice. Let us chant for a couple more minutes, and then I will begin with the subject. Govind Jai Jai Gopal Jai Jai Radha Raman Hari Govind Jai Jai Govind Jai Jai Gopal Jai Jai Radha Raman Hari Govind Jai Jai Govind Jai Jai Gopal Jai Jai Radha Raman Hari Govind Jai Jai Govind Jai Jai Gopal Jai Jai Radha Raman Hari Govind Jai Jai Govind Jai Jai Gopal Jai Jai Radha Raman Hari Govind Jai Jai Govind Jai Jai Gopal Jai Jai Radha Raman Hari Govind Jai Jai Govind Jai Jai Gopal Jai Jai Radha Raman Hari Govind Jai Jai Govind Jai Jai Gopal Jai Jai Radha Raman गोपाल जय जय राधा रमन हरि गोविंद जय जय
गोविंद जय जय गोपाल जय जय राधा रमण हरि गोविंद जय जय
गोविंद जय जय गोपाल जय जय राधा रमन हरि गोविंद जय जय
गोविंद जय जय गोपाल जय जय राधा रमण हरि गोविंद जय जय
गोविंद जय जय गोपाल जय जय राधा रमन हरि गोविंद जय जय
गोविंद जय जय गोपाल जय जय राधा रमण हरि गोविंद जय जय
गोविंद जय जय गोपाल जय जय राधा रमन हरि गोविंद जय जय
गोविंद जय जय गोपाल जय जय राधा रमण हरि गोविंद जय जय
गोविंद जय जय गोपाल जय जय राधा रमन हरि गोविंद जय जय
गोविंद जय जय गोपाल जय जय राधा रमण हरि गोविंद जय जय
गोविंद जय जय गोपाल जय जय राधा रमन हरि गोविंद जय जय
गोविंद जय जय गोपाल जय जय राधा रमण हरि गोविंद जय जय
बोले वृंदावन बिहारी लाल की
जय।
श्रीमद् सतगुरु सरकार की
जय
जय जय श्री राधे जय जय श्री राधे जय जय श्री राधे You must know that every living being in the universe is a fraction of God. And God is the embodiment of perfect happiness, perfect bliss. As the Vedas state, Chin matram Shri Hareransham Sukshmam Aksharam Avyayam. Every living being is an eternal part and parcel of God. Raso Vaisaha Rasagvam Hyevayam Labdhva Nandi Bhavati. Anando Brahmeti. Anand is Brahm, bliss is God, God is bliss. So every living being is a fraction of God, and God is the embodiment of perfect happiness, unlimited, everlasting happiness. And since every living being, every fraction, every part has a natural affinity, a natural love towards its source, its origin, every living being is striving to attain the goal of happiness since time immemorial. And since God is happiness, happiness is God, God and happiness are synonymous terms, it means that we can attain our goal of happiness only by knowing Him, only upon God realization. However, God is beyond the reach of our limited and material senses, mind, and intellect. How can He be known? Well, the Vedas tell us, Nayam atma parvachanena labhyo na medhayana bahuna shutena. He cannot be known by merely listening to discourses, nor can you know him by hearing about him, nor can you know him by reading the scriptures. Then how can he be known? Yame vaisha vrinute tena labhyastasyaisha atma vivrinute tanugvam swam. Kathopanishad 1:223. He can be known only through his grace. Dhatu prasadat deva prasadat. Only through his grace. The scriptures tell us that it is the most fortunate soul who is blessed with God's grace, who can see him, know him, attain him, and become eternally satisfied, eternally gratified. There's no other way possible. So he can be known through the attainment of his grace, and his grace is attained upon the fulfillment of a certain condition. And that condition is self-surrender to him. Atma samarpan. And what is the meaning of surrender? Surrender means the cessation of all activity. As Lord Krishna reveals in the Gita, he says, Sarva dharman parityajya mamekam sharanam braj. 1866. O Arjun, abandon all varieties of dharma, worldly duties and obligations, and come to me alone for shelter. Abandoning all hope and faith in others as well as in oneself, and relying solely on the strength, on the grace and mercy of the Supreme. That is surrender. In other words, when an individual no longer thinks himself to be the doer, he becomes a non-doer. He reaches that stage of complete inactivity. In other words, he no longer thinks himself to be the doer. You see, as long as we remain the doers, as long as we think ourselves to be the doers, God also does. He does the work of noting down our thoughts and ideas and thereby punishing or rewarding us accordingly. He plays the role of a judge. But the moment we start surrendering to him, he also starts showering his grace on us in direct proportion to our surrender. And as soon as our surrender is complete, he immediately assumes our full responsibility. Tesham nityabhiyuktanam yogakshemam vahamyaham. 9:22 Gita. So surrender means reaching the stage of complete inactivity. And since the mind, the faculty of thinking, is the motivating factor behind all our activities, all our actions, it means that we will have to vacate the mind. It is the mind that we must vacate and bring it to the stage of complete inactivity. And yet, when we look at the scriptures, they proclaim, Nahi kaschit chanamapi jatu tishthatya karmakrit. Gita 3:5 says that the mind cannot remain inactive for even a fraction of a moment. This statement of the scriptures makes us wonder what it is that our mind is so preoccupied with that it cannot be freed for even a moment. If our mind were in a neutral state, it could easily be molded in any direction. But our mind is already so firmly attached somewhere that it is almost impossible to change its direction. Our mind is very strongly attached to this material world. Why? Because it is a firm determination of our mind that the happiness we have been seeking since eternity will definitely be attained by us in this material world. So therefore, the mind will only reach that stage of complete inactivity once it changes its decision about happiness, about finding happiness in the world. So in order to change the decision of the mind and surrender it to God, we must explain to it the reality of this world, which is that there's no true happiness in this universe, right from the world that we are living in to the abode of Brahma, the highest celestial heavenly abode. Because if there were happiness in the world, real happiness, then everyone would have experienced it alike and at all times. The fact, however, is that a person or an individual that makes us happy one moment makes us miserable the next. So therefore, what we have to do, the scriptures tell us, is to detach our mind from the world. In other words, to free it from the feelings of love as well as hatred for the world. Only then will the mind become eligible to be surrendered to God. Another problem with the mind is that it is fickle. It is unstable. And as difficult to control as it is to control the wind. Arjuna says to Lord Krishna in the Gita, Chanchalam hi manah Krishna pramati balvadridham tasyaham nigraham manye vayoriva sudushkaram. 634. Oh Shri Krishna, you asked me to control the mind, but tell me how this most inconsistent, this most restless mind be made calm? How can it be made tranquil? It is so fickle that it runs from the nethermost regions to the sky within no time. Chanamayati patalam chanam yati nabhasthalam. Yog Vaishishth. And yet, several eminent scholars, several eminent philosophers have attempted to solve the mystery of the mind and have come up with various theories, various philosophies. Let us take a look. Starting with Charvak Brihaspati, whose philosophy is categorized as one of the atheistic schools of philosophy. He expresses and illustrates his views as follows. He says we cannot control the mind at all, so therefore it is a practice in futility. It is useless to make any effort to do so. He advises us not to bind our freedom-loving mind with ideals and regulations. According to him, we do not need to control the mind at all. We do not need to control the mind to attain our goal of happiness. His philosophy is to fulfill all desires that enter the mind. Eat, drink, and be merry. For example, suppose you felt like having something sweet, like ice cream, this very moment. If Charvak were here, he would tell you to make it a point to have ice cream right now. Then he would ask you if that ice cream gave you any pleasure. You would reply, yes, of course it did. Then he would say, this just goes to prove my point, that you can achieve happiness by fulfilling your desires. He even goes to the extent of saying, Yavat jivet sukham jivet rinam kritva ghritam pivet bhasmi bhutasya dehasya punaragamanam kutaha. In other words, he says that if you do not have the means, if you do not have the funds to acquire something that you really desire, the desired object, then borrow money from somewhere. Beg, borrow, and steal. Do whatever it takes to live your life to the fullest. For no one knows what will happen after death. You are only to worry about yourself. He says that the entire world is full of distress and misery. It is not your duty to look after anyone else. Everyone must look out for himself and himself alone. However, his philosophy goes directly against the philosophies of other philosophers who dismiss Charvak as being selfish and narrow-minded, and rightfully so. For instance, Helvetius, an eminent French philosopher, says it is wrong to consider the self only. We should also take into consideration the interest of others. Hobbes, another Western philosopher, also stood firm on this principle, and their philosophy was to gain immense popularity in the world. But when the question arose, when the question was asked as to what should be done when self-interest clashes with universal interest, with altruism. Altruism is the principle which looks out, a principle concerning the well-being, the selfless concern for the well-being of others. So when the question was asked as to what should be done when personal good clashes with universal good or the interest of others, they became silent and contented themselves by saying that when personal good clashes with universal good, then personal self-interest should be given more importance. Thereafter, another philosopher, Butler, appeared with his views. So far we have Charvak, who propagates self-interest only, and then we have Helvetius and Hobbes, who say that universal interest should be given equal importance, to say the least. Now, Butler appeared with his views. He says that self-interest should not be given any importance at all. According to him, altruism, selfless concern for the well-being of others, is the best principle to abide by. So again, we have three differing theories, philosophies. First, there is Charvak, who, as an example, says that if you see a starving man, do not get upset. You are only to worry about yourself. Helvetius and Hobbes are more moderate in their views. They do not sanction this total denial of helping others promoted by Charvak. They would advise us that if you see a starving man and you have 4 pieces of bread, you should give the starving man at least 2. Butler, on the other hand, goes ahead of even these 2. He would advise us to give all 4 pieces of bread to the poor man. However, according to Jagatguru Uttam Shri Kripalu Ji Maharaj, the 5th original spiritual master of this age, Supreme Master, according to him, there is not much difference between these 3 philosophies. Why? He says because all of them are only talking about the material good, the physical good of the individual. Although they're all concerned about altruism the principle of considering the well-being and happiness of others or the individual beings, yet they are unaware of the depth and the true meaning of altruism. You see, the Sanskrit word for altruism is pararth, and paraschaso atma. Par means the soul, and pararth means the benefit of the soul. However, all these three aforementioned philosophies are only concerned with the benefit of the body. They do not give any consideration. They do not consider the soul at all. We see in the world every day that an increase in physical comforts and luxury only results in the increase of anxiety and ambition, longing and hankering more and more for material objects, sense gratifications. Hence, another philosopher of the late 19th century, William James, an American philosopher, appeared with his views. An eminent psychologist as well of his time, he reflected on this very piece of knowledge, and he came up with the following theory, with the following formula. He said, less craving, less suffering, more craving, more suffering. So therefore, according to him, we should minimize our longing for material objects. In other words, he suggests that we should minimize our desires, longing for material gratifications. But even he falls short of the target in that he only talks about the cause behind our sorrows and sufferings and not about how to go about lessening them. In other words, he suggests lessening our desires, but he does not say anything about how to go about lessening our desires which are the root cause of our suffering. So he says to lessen them, but he does not say anything about how to go about doing that. So let us go into the Vedic scriptures, the ultimate authority on all knowledge, spiritual and material. And what do they tell us? There's a question in the Narad Bhakti Darshan. Kastarati mayam. Meaning, who is able to transcend the ocean of material existence? Who is able to cross the ocean of Maya? Naraji himself provides the answer. Yas sangans tyajati. He says, one who abandons all worldly attachments. Such a one is able to cross the ocean of Maya. But the question is, how can these attachments be abandoned? That is a question. And there seems to be no easy answer to this question. To solve the problem of removing the mind from worldly attachments, from material attachments, some practitioners, some use the method of Hatha Yoga, the doctrine of controlling the senses and the mind by incessant, continuous practice, and sometimes stern, severe practice. For instance, once there was a disciple of Socrates by the name of Diogenes. Socrates is the first ever moral Greek philosopher, and his disciple was Diogenes. He himself was a great renunciate, a vagabond. So once Diogenes sat before an inert idol of God and began to say again and again, "Oh idol, give me some bread. Oh idol, give me some bread. Oh idol, give me some bread." Another philosopher was watching him. Another philosopher was greatly amused by watching him do this all day long, repeating again and again. In the evening, he could no longer restrain himself, so he asked Diogenes, he said, "You're a learned and competent fellow." He was a philosopher as well. "I'm surprised to see you behaving like this. Do you really expect this inert idol to provide you food?" To this, Diogenes replied, "I know that this inert idol cannot provide me with food, but you see, I am just practicing forbearance, tolerance." This was to give you an example. Shri Ramakrishna Paramhans, the great master, spiritual master of Swami Vivekananda, he used to take a coin in one hand and a lump of dirt in the other, repeating continuously, "Taka mati, taka mati, taka mati." And when he was asked why he's doing this, taka means money, the coin, and mati means dirt. He used to say that I'm practicing in this way to convince myself that money and dirt are of equal importance. But even such attempts to control the mind are not as effective, as Lord Krishna explains in the Gita, because they fail to create the feeling of natural detachment, natural distaste or disinterest from the mundane world. And moreover, the slightest negligence or carelessness can destroy the entire practice. So what is the proper way of controlling the mind? As Lord Krishna himself solves the answer to this question in response to Arjun's question. He says, "Asanshayam mahabaho mano durnigraham chalam abhyasena tu kaunteya vairagyena cha grihyate." 635. He said the mind can be, granted that the mind is fickle, it is impetuous, turbulent, constantly moving rapidly, restless, etc., etc. And yet it can be controlled by constant practice and detachment, natural detachment. What is natural detachment? Creating a natural feeling instead of forced control of desires and passions. The Patanjali also states, "Abhyas vairagya bhyam tan nirodha." The restless mind can be brought under control through constant practice and non-attachment or detachment. So detachment is that state of the mind when the mind becomes bereft, devoid of both the feelings affection as well as malice, love as well as hatred. Let me backtrack a little bit. So there is the word detachment. In Hindi, it is called vairagya. And the opposite of detachment is attachment or anurag or asakti. You see, the word attachment consists of two things, two elements, affection and malice, or love and hatred. Generally, when we think of affection, affinity, love, we relate all these feelings, these sentiments to attachment. Whereas we relate malice, feelings of hatred, as just being ill will, feelings of ill will where there's no trace of attachment. But that is not so. The precise meaning of the word attachment is the unity of the mind with an object or a person. For example, if we love someone, our mind becomes constantly engrossed in the thoughts of that person. And what happens in enmity? There too, the mind becomes absolutely engrossed in the thoughts of the enemy. If we have feelings of hatred for someone, there too the mind becomes very much attached to that person. For example, suppose a mother is greatly attached to her son, and she feels that she cannot live without him. Her mind is constantly engrossed in the thoughts of her son. She's continuously thinking about the way he walks, the way he talks, the way he smiles, laughs, plays, etc., etc. So this is an example of extreme love. And what happens in hostility or enmity? There too, the mind remains imbued with the thoughts of the enemy about his defects, his unpleasant face, how we can inflict harm on him, etc. In other words, that the mind is preoccupied, becomes preoccupied with the person we detest, with the person we dislike, just as it becomes preoccupied with the person we love dearly. So in reality, the mind is engaged as much by hatred as it is engaged by love. So this being the case, the point to bear in mind is this. The personality who is thought of by the mind again and again, due to any type of attachment, be it love or hatred, leaves a strong impression on the mind. If that is a worldly person, so the point is, if that is a worldly person, we will attain material results. If that personality is divine, then the result will also be divine. If that personality is divine, referring to God or the God-realized saint. Vedavyas says in this respect in the Bhagavad, to understand this concept a little bit better, he says, Kamam krodham bhayam sneha maikyam sauhridamevacha nityam harau vidhato yanti tanmayatam hite. 10th canto, 29th chapter, 15th verse. He says it matters not whether the mind is attached to the Supreme Personality with the feelings of love and affection or with the feelings of anger, fear, or passion. The end result will be the same. You will attain the divine state after leaving this body. On the other hand, if you're attached to the world, the result will be the attainment of this world and world alone. And this attachment to the world or worldly individual will only and ultimately result in sorrow and suffering. This is the point. Vedavyas, let us go further into the Bhagavatam and take the example of the gopis. The gopis, the maidens of Vrindavan, the milk maidens of Braj, were the highest devotees of Lord Krishna. And the condition of their heart was such that it was infused, it was filled with extreme love for Shri Krishna, which is beautifully described in the Bhagavatam by Vedavyas, who is also the divine author of the Bhagavatam, along with many other texts. And he describes it in the following verse. Yadohane vahanane mathano pale paprenken khanar bharudito chanamarjanadau gayanti jaina manurakta dhiyo shrukantyo Dhanya brajas triyaurukramachittayana. Beautiful verse in the Bhagavad, 10th canto, 10:44-15. Meaning that the heart of the gopis always remained saturated with exclusive love for Lord Krishna. All day long, their mind was constantly thinking of Shri Krishna. Whether they happened to be milking the cows, churning butter, cleaning the house, serving the children, or performing any other household chore. In addition, this extreme love was accompanied by incessant shedding of tears as well. Such was the love of the gopis. Now, what about Kunj, the opposite? Lord Krishna's uncle as well as his greatest enemy. His only motive was to kill Shri Krishna at any cost and in any way possible. And look at the condition reached by him due to his extreme animosity. The Bhagavatam explains how his mind became so full of anxiety that he could not see anything else except Shri Krishna. He would even throw away his food, for he saw Shri Krishna in each and every particle of the food and even the water he was served. So extreme was his preoccupation with Shri Krishna that he would even tear off his clothing and thereafter even his flesh, for he saw Shri Krishna in each and every pore of his body. Imagine such attachment. As a result of this extreme preoccupation, Kunj also attained the highest seat of devotion, as did the gopis. His mind, like the gopis, was ever united with Shri Krishna. And consequently, he achieved the same divine abode of Shri Krishna. That is to say, Golok, as did the gopis. Of course, that doesn't mean that we must love God. We cannot have the feelings of hatred or towards Him. We are not at that. Our devotion is not at that elevated stage yet. So we must, of course, harbor feelings of love and affection towards the Supreme Personality, towards the Divine Personality. So in conclusion, the point is this. You must understand that the attachment to a divine personality, that is to say God or the saint, the philosophy, the siddhanta is this, that attachment to a divine personality with any kind of feeling is desirable. It is praisable by the scriptures. And attachment to a worldly person with any kind of feeling in any condition is deplorable, it's regrettable, it's condemnable, in fact. Why? Because attachment to a divine personality will result in, we will attain divine results, divine fruits. After leaving this body, as I mentioned, we will attain the divine state. Whereas attachment to a worldly person will ultimately result in sorrow and suffering. So this is a point to bear in mind. And I will pause here, and we will continue on with the subject tomorrow. बोले श्रीमद् सतगुरु सरकार की
जय,
लाडली लाल की
जय,
जय जय श्री राधे, जय जय श्री राधे, जय जय